Our next speakers hail from Pennsylvania. Captain Evan Clark works with the Three Rivers Waterkeeper, and Eric Harder works for the Mountain Watershed Association. These two organizations work together closely. The Three Rivers Waterkeeper and Penn Environment have a pending lawsuit against BVPV Styrenics and its parent company, Styropec, for alleged violations of the Federal Clean Water Act. Captain Evan, Eric, welcome, and thank you for being here to tell us about your work.
Thank you, Kelly. Appreciate it. I'll just do a quick intro. My name's Eric Harder. I'm the Youghiogheny Riverkeeper, and I work for Mountain Watershed Association. Our area basically covers 1,700 square miles, and traditionally our issues with water quality extend from AMD issues associated with abandoned mines, recreational heavy use in the summertime, and a whole suite of other typical issues with water quality. But I appreciate being here and honored to be here. So I appreciate those nice words from Representative Levin. Like myself, I also have 2 children, and I also believe I live in one of the most beautiful areas of the United States, so I can appreciate everyone's sentiment there.
All right. Well, thanks, Eric, and thanks, Kelly, especially, and everybody else who's put this webinar together, and all the participants, and of course, the audience for listening. My name is Captain Evan Clark. I work with Three Rivers Waterkeeper. I've been a waterkeeper here in the greater Pittsburgh area for the last around 3 years. Before that, I worked for another nonprofit called Allegheny Cleanways, and I, with the help of a lot of volunteers, picked about 1 million pounds of trash out of the rivers. And the overwhelming majority of that trash was plastics. This was like post-consumer plastics. So it was really interesting as soon as I started with Waterkeeper to get pulled into a project that Mountain Watershed had already started with this patrol around an up-and-coming plastics plant in our area, which is Shell's ethane cracker plant, or Shell Appalachia. And what they do down there is make polyethylene primarily out of fracked natural gas feedstock. So it's not just plastics, which are a great and an important tool in the materials we have to use in our society, but I think are a tool that really need to be used appropriately and used with the long term in mind, and that's clearly not happening. As Shell was getting ready to get started, they started construction in about 2016, and they were advertised as the largest potential capacity plastic producer in the U.S. About 1.6 million tons per annum was their plan. And they were also really thinking that they were going to be able to produce plastics significantly cheaper than other plastics on the market, which, I mean, I think that that's probably the last thing we need is a lower upfront cost. They're massively subsidized, $1.65 billion by the state of Pennsylvania with tax exemptions and other tax breaks. And when they started operation in November of 22, right away they had massive air issues, $5 million fine, which was record setting from our DEP, which was for blowing through a whole year's worth of air pollution in a single month. Another interesting thought I wanted to throw in the mix about Shell. There was something I'd heard early on as they were getting ready to set up their plant in town, about 30 miles outside of Pittsburgh, was that folks were thinking about Shell's plant up here as kind of a form of industrial climate migration with all the problems they were having along the Gulf Coast, having to shut down production so often. And if you want to read a little bit more about Shell and Pennsylvania, there's an ORV article that I thought was really informative called Pennsylvania's Bad Bet. With that, I'm going to kick it over to Eric again to talk a little bit about the work that they started, and I joined in with doing some pre-production patrolling with Shell.
Thanks, Evan. Yeah, there's a good picture of us actually. James there in the front of the picture in the Steelers hat. Would love to be here. He's been very dedicated and very passionate about the NERDA Patrol. The Heather's there, executive director of Three Rivers Waterkeeper, and Evan in the background, and myself there. And so we've been out every month for the past, I'd say, 4 years. It started in 2020, maybe a couple months where we had to skip or we missed, but every month we go out and we do what we have called our own NERDA Patrol. And so with that, just want to recognize the other nerdapatrol.org that is out there is basically where we got a lot of our protocol from, a lot of our ideas about how to map some of these issues. And you can see us in the picture there. There's the crew has already sampled one of our areas and are picking through the debris to look for these nurdles. And when it comes down to it, our basic thought was, how are we going to share this knowledge about plastics in our water? And for someone who lives in Southwest Pennsylvania, the fact that there is floating plastic debris in our waterways is concerning enough. However, now there is a manufacturer and basically a generator of these nurdles in our area. So is there plastic in our waterway? Is there nurdles? Is something that we had basically had to ask ourselves, and how are we going to find out? So we established a protocol of our own, where you see on the picture upstream and downstream locations of where we sampled, and those are upstream and downstream of the Shell cracker plant there on the center of the screen. So water is coming at us, and we felt that we needed to sample as close to Shell as possible so that we didn't get an influx of other tributaries or waterways that are coming in that could also skew our data, I guess, in one sense. So prior to construction, we set up these locations and sampled 5 locations upstream, 5 locations downstream. And we would sample basically by using a motorboat and trying to match the speed of the river, the Ohio River in this case, going in an upstream fashion. Basically, we're staying steady as we drag what you see in the photo here, our trowel through the water to sample a segment of the waterway. And now that metal opening is only 1 foot wide. So if you add up all of our sampling, it's only 5 feet of river that we're actually sampling in the entire transect of the Ohio there. So it's a very, very small window and just a very small snapshot of actually what's happening in the waterway. And yet our first time out, we were surprised that we actually found a nurdle. So not only would we set up a transect and go 5 different locations across to sample across the river what was actually floating downstream, but we would also get out on the ground and look around, basically performing the same protocol that was established by the nerdapatrol.org, so that we can keep some sort of recognizable protocol, which was deemed pretty accurate in the past about counting and finding hotspots. This next picture is basically an upstream photo of the facilities near Shell, and I think that's another part of what a benefit of this project was, is it got us on the water so often that we were able to identify other streams that were culprits that would carry these products downstream. And this facility specifically came into play. And go ahead, Evan, I'll let you follow up on what happens at Styropec.
Yeah. So I think it's also important to point out in those years, year plus of sampling, around the area before Shell started operations. We were consistently seeing plastics in the water and consistently seeing plastics on the shoreline, all from pretty varied origins, lots of different colors, shapes, degrees of weathering. So we knew right away we had a plastics problem. And even before Shell started operation. The other thing that we stumbled upon literally almost was this Styropack facility had just changed ownership from Nova Chemicals when we started patrolling. And it turns out it was that facility is the largest expanded polystyrene producer in North America. And you see in the picture on the right, very tiny little beads of polystyrene basically unpopped, coating leaves of plants, and that was our first clue that something was going on. We started dragging our trawl through, and it's very hard to see in there, but there's tons of tiny little plastics, smaller than a poppy seed, peppering that sample that we had pulled out of their trawl, and right in the middle of it, there's a tiny fish. We would see these fish which is very common for us to see around any outfall, but fish schooling, big pods, a lot of bait fish, and a lot of people fishing those outfalls as well. So it was pretty concerning. We went directly to our PA Department of Environmental Protection, EPA, PA Fish and Boat, and reported these as an issue. And I thought of it as a pretty simple NIFTY's permit, Clean Water Act permit issue, where we were looking at floating solids and or trash coming out of these facilities. And so it seemed clear to us that that there should be some enforcement taking place. After we watched, a vast amount of these plastics come out of Styropack for over a year, we finally threw our hands up in the air and with the assistance of a legal team, I'm sorry, here, gave a notice that we were going to sue. And the settlement, which we're hopeful for, is still pending. I can't really talk a lot about that since there's a lot of negotiation going on, but we're asking for them to work on remediation projects around the site, because the ground around there it's just deeply covered in plastics, as well as the stream. Expenses, of course. And zero discharge out of their plant in the future, and then of course fines, which would be enforceable by our DEP, who has joined us in the lawsuit. And we're really excited to be amongst this kind of, I guess, select group of folks who doing this precedent-setting work, hopefully, and getting enforcement done on these plastics violators.
One thing to add is, I think what Representative Levin was really pointing at is there is no set standard for nurdles or plastic pellet pollution. And for Pennsylvania, I don't feel that the DEP will be establishing any standard until after the EPA does. They have assumed the responsibility of the Clean Water Act, so they will basically wait for the EPA to make some standard and then either copy that or slightly change that. So I think the purpose of the act, I think, is to address those issues.
I think two things I want to cover real quick before we pass it on is that those last two slides were an Operation Clean Sweep picture. It's a voluntary association amongst plastic producers where they pledge not to lose plastics on the ground. And I also have a short video of panning down from that sticker down to the open valve and then down to the nurdles, which you can kind of see in the background in there as well. It was that was a rough day seeing all of that. I'm assuming that we're probably running over now and you want to move on? Okay.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that. I think it's really important people hear your story because so often nurdles are perceived as a coastal problem, and you are showing that it's not. Industrial climate migration is a really interesting term. So thank you so much. I really appreciate it.